Isiah Thomas. The Celtics need Anthony Davis. But there's a problem. $175 million. Have you ever seen a rumor and thought, this is brilliant, but it could go very wrong? So stay with me. Isiah Thomas released the idea, a $175 million trade to take Anthony Davis to the Celtics. And I know exactly what goes through the fans' mind. We want the title, we want the last adjustment, but we're scared to death of betting everything on a guy who might not last the entire season. This is the pain. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you what makes this trade seem tempting, what the real problem is behind it, and whether there's a safer way for Boston to improve without putting its future at risk. Let's do it. Before I show you what the real problem with this exchange is, real quick, if you like NBA and want direct analysis, subscribe now because we are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and reaching this goal really helps the channel to grow, reach more people, and bring even more complete content to you here, always. So do the following. Subscribe, leave a like, it's literally 1 second and it's already very powerful, and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos, especially when there's hot news. And comment below, would you make this switch? Yes or no? Now stay with me because in a little while I'll show you the however that changes everything and might make you see this idea in a different way. When we talk about the Boston Celtics, the conversation almost always starts with the stars, with the fit of the perimeter, with the way the team alternates defensive intensity and patience in attack. But there is one subject that comes back like clockwork no matter how well the team is doing, the pivot position. And I'm not just talking about who's the starter today. I'm talking about what that means in 1, 2, 3 years, when the season gets tougher, when the East gets more physical, when every possession becomes a battle and you need someone who can take the heat for 30, 35 minutes without breaking the team's structure. That's when that feeling that every fan knows appears. We look at the squad and think it's almost perfect, and that's precisely why every detail seems huge. Neemias Queta has been a really cool story to follow. You can see evolution, you can see energy, you can see presence in the paint, and above all, you can see that he understood what the Celtics ask for. Positioning discipline, protecting the rim without being desperate in every dribble. And that work that almost no one applauds, but everyone feels when it is lacking, which is to seal, make the first contact, fight for space, and allow the rest of the team to live. But at the same time, there is a very clear line between having a center who delivers good minutes and having a starting center who sustains a title project for years. Queta can be very useful and still be, in Joe Mazzulla's ideal design, a second unit piece, a guy who comes in to change the energy, hold rebounds, bring physical impact, but without necessarily being the pillar that defines his ceiling in playoffs. And it is exactly in this interval, in this almost, that speculations begin to arise. Because when the team's base is strong, when you already have plenty of talent on the wings, when the perimeter is reliable, the temptation is always the same. Finding that last piece that turns contending into absolute favorite. And then the names start to appear. Ivica Zubac, for example, is the type of center that a lot of people look at and think, it makes sense. He's big, he's strong, he's a player who understands his role, fights for rebounds, provides consistent rim protection, and doesn't need the ball all the time to be useful. It's not the pivot that's going to give you headlines every day, but it's the pivot that gives you stability. And stability in playoffs is worth its weight in gold. But even when you put a name like that on the table, there's always that voice in the background. Okay, but is this the most you can do? That's exactly when a speech came in that messed with a lot of people's heads, because it came from someone who doesn't speak like any commentator, Isiah Thomas. When an NBA legend, a point guard who has experienced the highest level of competition, says something like that, it has a different impact. He basically placed Boston within a select group of teams that, in his view, if they managed to trade for Anthony Davis, would immediately move up the shelf. And when he mentions the Celtics, he's not making small talk. He's looking at the way Boston plays, at what Jaylen Brown represents, at what Jayson Tatum creates, at the space the team generates, at the collective defense capacity, and he's thinking about the fit of a player who, in an ideal world, would be a monster in that context. Because let's be honest here, talking like we do on the Celtics Talk Show, when Anthony Davis is healthy and in rhythm, he's one of the scariest things the NBA has. He covers the rim, he changes markings, he helps from behind, He cleans up rows. He's the type of player who makes an attack think twice before entering the paint. And on the other hand, he scores without you needing to assemble the entire team for him. He gets rebounds, runs the court, finishes, can play as a 5 or as a 4. He opens up possibilities. A whole Davis in Boston is the kind of acquisition that makes the entire league look and say, okay, now it's complicated. And then you understand why the title Celtics need Anthony Davis sticks in the mind. Because it affects the emotional part of the fan who is already tired of seeing the team hit the goalpost or fall due to details. It stirs the feeling that the Celtics, when they find the right path, have a chance to dominate. And he plays with a fantasy that, on paper, seems perfect. Imagine TD Garden with a team that can defend any action, that can alternate exchanges, that can be big and fast at the same time, and that still has an elite defensive anchor. The idea alone is powerful, and that is precisely why it is also dangerous, because powerful ideas sometimes hide giant problems. The first but is very simple: history and context. Boston had interest in Anthony Davis before, way back before he went to the Lakers. At that moment, there was that public resistance from the family. There was the message that it was not a desired destination. That's part of the past, of course, but it shows that it was never an obvious relationship. But that's not even the main point. The main point is that time passed, and over time, Anthony Davis became something else. He became a player with more mileage, with more scars, with more seasons in which his body took a toll. And the question that defines it all is not, is Anthony Davis good? Because everyone knows that. The question is, which version of it are you buying? And even more so, how long does this version appear for? This is where the fans' pain comes in. And I mean pain because anyone who has followed the Celtics for years knows what it's like to build something solid and see the detail turn into a tragedy. You want to believe, you want the final blow, but you've also seen projects risked by taking too big a gamble. Anthony Davis is 32 years old, and it's not an absurd age, it's not a sentence, but it's an age where each injury weighs differently. And his injury history is not a detail you can ignore with a smile. It's recurring. It's a factor that changes rotation planning, changes minutes, changes how you train, changes how you arrive in April and May. And the playoffs don't forgive, let's see if it gets better. Playoff demands presence, demands repetition, demands full body. The second but is the contract, which is where the conversation stops being a dream and becomes cold mathematics. We are talking about a huge commitment, something in the region of $175 million over 3 years, with salaries that are heavy now and that become even heavier later, reaching more than $60 million down the road if the option is exercised. And then you're no longer just discussing, is he the right player? You're discussing, can the Celtics build the rest of the team around this without holding themselves back? Because Boston doesn't live by just one name. Boston lives on an identity, deep cast, ability to adapt, pieces that fit together without depending on a single path. You mess with this financial engineering and suddenly you could be giving up depth, flexibility, and future for a package that has a huge ceiling but also has a proportional risk. And here I think it's important to talk about Brad Stevens as an executive, because many people still think of Brad as a coach and forget that he operates the team with a very clear philosophy. He does not have an irresponsible all-in profile. He likes control. He likes movements that make sense within the planning. And from his point of view, such an expensive bet on a player with high physical risk is exactly the kind of thing that could take the Celtics off the path they have so carefully built. It's not just get Davis and that's it. It's what do I need to deliver to get Davis? Because nobody trades a player of that level for change. You will need to send a salary. You will need to send assets. You will need to sacrifice something important. And then, when you realize you're not just bringing in a pivot, you are rewriting the project. But then there's the other side, and I don't like to pretend that it doesn't exist, because this is the type of issue that divides fans precisely because strong arguments exist on both sides. The pro side is almost irresistible. In theory, Anthony Davis would solve several pains at once. He would be a center capable of being the team's best defender on many nights, and that's the kind of luxury that changes series. It would allow Boston to play small without being small, to change markings without being vulnerable, to pressure the ball more aggressively because there would be someone putting out fires behind behind them. He would also make life easier for his wingers, because defense generates attack. And a Celtics with more transition, more guaranteed defensive rebounds, more blocks and deflections, the Celtics are even more difficult to contain. Furthermore, the presence of a star of this caliber can indeed change the way opponents build their squad. There are exchanges that are not just about one more player. They are about changing the balance of the conference. But this is where I return to the word that defines this debate: cost. And cost is not just money. Cost is what you leave along the way. If you give up depth, useful young people, choices, contracts that give flexibility, you are telling the world that there is only one way to win. And the Celtics, the way they were set up, always tried to have more than one way. Trying Anthony Davis would be choosing a very specific path. Let's bet on the maximum peak and accept the risk to the body and the contract. And that could be genius. Or it could be that kind of move that, if it goes wrong, you can't undo easily. And there is an emotional part to all of this that I think we need to admit. We, as fans, often think that the perfect solution is the one that makes noise. If it's going to move, make it big. Wow. But in the NBA, the big one isn't always the smartest one. Sometimes the trade that takes you to the title is the one that gives you 15% more in the right place, with less risk, and leaves the rest of the squad breathing. Sometimes the pivot you need is not the name that dominates the headlines, but the guy who gives you constant presence, health, fit, and controlled costs. Because the Celtics don't need someone to carry the team. The Celtics need someone to complete the team. So when Isiah Thomas says, if Boston makes this trade, it will become a champion candidate again, I completely understand his reasoning. I see the picture he is drawing. I can also imagine a tough series in the East where the difference is having a generational defender at the rim. But I can also see the film that no one wants to see. April approaching, the team trying to adjust the rotation, the player's body not responding as it should, the contract weighing down, the options diminishing, and the Celtics trapped in a gigantic gamble. And it is this balance that makes this subject so magnetic. It's not just yes or no, it's how far is it worth going to increase your chances now. The most curious thing is that this debate says a lot about the Celtics stage. When you are an average team, you take any risk because you have nothing to lose. When you are a strong team, every risk has a higher price because you are already close to the top. And Boston today is exactly in that position, close to the top. That's why a name like Anthony Davis becomes a temptation, because he's the type of player who, if he fits in and stays together, can make a strong team look unfair. But if I have to bring this to the reality of fans who want to sleep peacefully, I would say the following. There is a sensible path here, and it starts with separating need from opportunity. The Celtics need to think about their starting center for the future, yes. You need to think about continuity, yes. You need to look at the rotation and see what works in the playoffs, yes. But that doesn't mean the answer needs to be the most expensive and risky bet on the market. The answer may be a move that preserves what Boston has most value: consistency, depth, and flexibility. And here comes something that I really like to observe in modern basketball. The ideal center is not always the center who scores 25 points. He is often the pivot who improves everyone around him without asking for the spotlight. He is the pivot who holds the rebound, protects the rim, completes the basics, blocks well, understands angles, doesn't make silly fouls, and is available. It seems simple, but it's rare. And that's exactly why names like Zubac are starting to appear heavily in these conversations, because they represent a kind of solution: less glamour, more stability. And stability is what makes you arrive in one piece when it really matters. Now, I'm also not going to pretend that this issue doesn't deserve the attention it's getting. When a legend like Isiah Thomas specifically mentions Boston, it signals that the Celtics are on their radar as a destination that makes sense for stars. And this is very important, because regardless of whether Davis happens or not, these types of discussions put the Celtics in a prestigious place. It puts Boston as a team that isn't just trying to compete, it's trying to dominate. And for a market and a franchise with this history, this has weight. In the end, what I want you to take away from this conversation is this: Anthony Davis in Boston is the idea that makes the heart race, and at the same time makes the head stop. It's the proposal that seems to make the Celtics an instant favorite, but it comes at a price too high to be treated as obvious. And maybe that's exactly why this topic is so good for us to discuss here on the Celtics Talk Show, because it's the type of subject that reveals how each fan sees the basket. There are people who prefer maximum risk for maximum peak. There are people who prefer the safe path, accumulating small advantages until they become big. And now I really want to hear you, as if we were talking face to face. If you were Brad Stevens for a day, would you press this button? Would you accept the $175 million gamble, the physical risk, the need to send assets, in exchange for the chance to have a generational talent on defense and an all-around star alongside Tatum and Brown? Or would you prefer the Celtics maintain their current path, look for a more sustainable center, preserve flexibility, and trust that collective strength is what will bring the next title? Because deep down, the question is not, is Anthony Davis good? The question is, which version of the Celtics do you want to see? A Celtics that tries to be as powerful as possible now, whatever the cost, or a Celtics that tries to be champions the way they build dynasties, with a solid base and room to adjust? The answer, whatever it is, says a lot about what we believe we win in the NBA. And just to close this reasoning with the honesty that this channel always tries to have, if Anthony Davis was guaranteed healthy for an entire postseason, this conversation would be short. Boston would probably become the most feared team in the East. The problem is that this type of guarantee does not exist. And that's why, no matter how seductive the idea is, it needs to be analyzed with the coldness that separates a brilliant movement from a movement that commits years. So stay with me on this subject, because the center position in Boston is not just a technical gap. It's an identity choice. It's a choice of path. And when the path is one of title, each step has to be calculated. But I want to know, would you step on the gas, or would you stay in control and choose the safest route? And that's what makes this story so absurd. It's not about if Anthony Davis changes the Celtics. It's about how much you would be willing to pay, but in money and parts and in the future, to try to deliver the final blow now. Because if he arrives in one piece, Boston doesn't just get a center, get a shield, gain a defensive monster. He gains a fit that can turn a series into a run-over. But if the body doesn't respond, you don't just lose a player. You waste time, lose flexibility, and open a dangerous window for the rest of the league to catch up to you. So I want to close with a question that is worth more than any rumor. Do you press the all-in button for Anthony Davis, or do you prefer a safer center to keep the Celtics at the top for longer? Write down here yes or no without half a word. And if you want, put the reason in a sentence. Now, if you enjoy this type of deeper analysis, with context and without fluff, I have a quick invitation. Go to the pinned comment and click on the Celtics Analysis playlist. There I left a sequence of videos that will help you see these casting decisions in a much clearer way. It's practically a map of what Boston needs to adjust to remain dominant. And if you've made it this far, do the combo. Leave a like, because this pushes the video to more fans, and subscribe so you don't miss the next updates, because this topic won't die today. We'll see you in the next video. But first, check out the pinned comment and marathon Celtics analysis, because if this exchange turns into a serious conversation, you'll want to be one step ahead.